ANZ's chief executive has warned the Australian dream of home ownership has become the preserve of the rich. Shane Elliott says strict home loan regulations have created the most difficult environment in 30 years to get approval for a mortgage. The average mortgage now close to $600,000 according to the ABS, marking a $250,000 rise since 2013. Let's go to Canberra. National Senator Matt Canavan joins us. Matt, there is that part of it. And there's also comments from Peter Costello in The Australian this morning that says migration is the root of the housing affordability crisis at the moment. Do you agree with him?
Well, I think the Labor government has botched our emergence from the COVID pandemic. Obviously, there was a lot of unmet demand for additional workers, for migrant workers in some industries because we had closed our borders for 2 years. But this government has just opened the floodgates to people coming in without any proper plan about where they'd be housed. And that has then meant that the knock-on effect has meant that Australians themselves, Australians living here, Australian citizens haven't been able to afford a home. I mean, there are people in our major cities that have to live in tents, people with jobs, because they just can't find a home. And the government has to take some responsibility for this because they control the number of people coming from overseas. And it's become very, very clear that they haven't properly calibrated our migration numbers to our ability to bring them in. So what Peter Costello is saying is just total common sense. But unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any kind of reflection yet from the government that they may have botched this, that they need to reconsider the numbers coming in. They seem addicted to the Treasury estimates that the more numbers we bring in, the more tax revenue that comes in. So they just want to keep these floodgates open. But I think we have to look at a broader balance here, the broader environment for our migration intake, and it's far too high at the moment.
On housing, though, I mean, this isn't the fault of any one government. I mean, this is the fault of successive governments, not just at a federal level, but also at state levels. It's across the board.
Well, and you'll notice maybe in my initial comments, I didn't say this government was principally responsible for the housing supply issue. But given that is a constraint, we know, as you say, this has been a long-term challenge for us to build enough homes. Given we know that challenge is there, we've got to calibrate our migration intake to our ability to house people. And that hasn't happened by this government. They haven't factored in that constraint. Now, of course, it would be great to remove some of those barriers and constraints, but I understand there's no magic wand for a federal government to wave there because a lot of those issues are controlled by state and local governments, and a lot of the local NIMBYism type politics necessitates against large-scale land release. But that's, again, come back to why we need to then, the things that the federal government does control in terms of migration, they need to factor those constraints in when they decide those
What's
numbers.
the line, though, on migration? Because there's still, the workers are still needed on construction sites, etc. I mean, there is still a shortage out there of workers, so we do need more folks in the country. When do you stop?
Well, I'm not saying we reduce the intake to zero. There's just got to be a better balance. And
so what's the balance?
Taking
what's the
in a number of people. Well, look, I think we need to return more to levels like our average intake, which is around that 200,000 a year. The former coalition government had reduced a bit below that because we were worried about the pressures being caused by migration. This was before COVID. And so something around that figure needs to be something we return to. But as I say, there just seems to be no reflection from the government here, no even understanding that this is one of the principal causes of the housing crisis that's bedeviling Australians right now. And so where is their plan to get those numbers back down to more average-like levels? And, of course, to try and in the long term deal with those housing and infrastructure constraints. My other concern here, the government is threatening over the past couple of weeks to cut back on infrastructure spending. Well, if you're going to take in the size of Canberra every year as we are right now, we actually need to build infrastructure. We need to free up our roads and broader networks. But so cutting back on infrastructure funding does not seem like a smart idea while you're taking in so many people.
Just on the Israel-Hamas conflict at the moment, Matt, there is a protest that's taking place out the front of Parliament House this morning. That's a pro-Israeli one. You've got also school students in Victoria being encouraged to protest in support of Palestine next week. So they're going to leave school for that. A lot of folks aren't going to be happy about that. What are your thoughts?
Well, it seems to me that the Venn diagram of the radical Free-Palestine, pro-Hamas movement is very similar. It's almost the same circle as the Greta Thunberg Just Stop Oil type crew, because they're using the same tactics. It's giving your kids a day off school. It was used to be to save the planet. Now it is to apparently support Hamas and Palestine. Look, I just wish we'd keep our kids out of this. There's enough. This is causing enough division right around the world. It's ugly to see on our own nation's streets that division spill over. We've all should be hoping for peace and for this conflict to be resolved as soon as possible. And I think that's the simple message that we should relay to our children, rather than try and activate them and somehow get involved in this conflict that's on the other side of the world.
Matt Canavan, we're out of time. Good to chat. We'll talk to you soon.